I'll just say good morning to everybody and then let you carry on.
Sounds good.
Good morning, everyone. This is our regular Sunday morning answer to Job session, and I'm a little bit behind in my preparation today, so I'm going to ask Jordan to begin with paragraph 569 while I send out a little MailChimp notice, and then we'll carry on. So Jordan, over to you.
Sounds good. Answer to Job, paragraph 569. In view of this intense personal relatedness to his chosen people, it was only to be expected that a regular covenant would develop, which also extended to certain individuals. For instance, to David. As we learned from the 89th Psalm, Yahweh told him, "My steadfast love I will keep for him forever, and my covenant will stand firm for him. I will not violate my covenant or alter the word that went forth from my lips. Once for all, I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David." Paragraph 570. And yet it happened that he who watched so jealously over the fulfillment of laws and contracts broke his own oath. Modern man, with his sensitive conscience, would have felt the black abyss opening and the ground giving way under his feet. For the least he expects of his God is that he should be superior to mortal man in the sense of being better, higher, nobler, but not his superior in the kind of moral flexibility and unreliability that do not jib even at perjury. Of course, one must not tax an archaic God with the requirements of modern ethics. For the people of early antiquity, things were rather different. In their gods, there was absolutely everything. They teemed with virtues and vices. Hence, they could be punished, put in chains, deceived, stirred up against one another without losing face, or at least not for long. The man of that epoch was so inured to divine inconsistencies that he was not unduly perturbed when they happened. With Yahweh, the case was different, because from quite early on, the personal and mortal tie began to play an important part in the religious relationship. In these circumstances, a breach of contract was bound to have the effect not only of a personal, but of a moral injury. One can see this from the way David answers Yahweh. "How long, Lord, wilt thou hide thyself forever? Shall thy wrath burn like fire? Remember how short my time is. Wherefore hast thou made all men in vain? Lord, where are thy former loving kindnesses, which by thy faithfulness thou didst swear to David?" And I think here we get the beginning of the petition for the positivity of the God. It's like basically, why have ye forsaken me? And it also gives a little cursory history of how divinity was viewed at the time. Before there was a more inured with the divinity of having all the qualities of people, of man, of people, and the jealousy, the happiness, the wrath, the kindnesses, and then the more modern as it moved through to the single God, then that became an above, in a sense, and like above morality. In a sense, it's not immoral. It was an amoral God. It didn't need to have morals. It was above all that and all powerful, all knowing. And so here, David, but Lord, where are thy former kindnesses, thy former loving kindnesses, which by thy faithfulness thou didst swear to David? That's the looking up and saying why. Looking up and instead of taxing the archaic God with modern ethics like they wouldn't, this is doing that. And I think that wording is interesting, of taxing an archaic God with modern ethics. The ancient gods were just rife with virtue, vice, truth, lies. In a sense, one giant big game of chess, with kind of people as the pieces. And it's interesting to me that that polytheism, where the panoply, the multiple Godhead, and Goddess head, that was basically nature and human nature personified out into divine beings, to play the stories of myth and to play the stories of legend, and in one sense to be a higher octave oral tradition that began obviously to be written down. So hopefully Skip will be back here in just a second, but I think that this gives us a beginning today to where our loving kindnesses, which by thy faithfulness thou didst swear to David. And it's interesting in current events, we're kind of seeing that the whole world could be saying this. And I have to say that I really admire the Ukrainian spirit and the strength and actually the majesty of the people. So I think there's a divinity there within a people that, in a sense, the world is, from a government standpoint, standing and being spectators. Whereas I did hear the satellite internet, they asked Elon Musk if he would set it up, and 10 hours later, he called back and he said, done. So it's not left forsaken as much, but in our times, I think this is quite an example. So to get back to the text, old gods wouldn't lose face for long, but here the modern God is being, tasked or subject to modern ethics and asking, where are the former loving kindnesses? And you're still muted.
Well, I'm in total agreement with you, of course. You got through 569 only, did you?
I went to 573 simply because there was the call and then the response.
Right.
The initial psalm, and then the Lord, where are thy former loving kindnesses, at the end of 571, which by that faithfulness, because also it added in 571, the one must not tax an archaic God with the requirements of modern ethics. For the people of early antiquity, things were different. Their gods, there was absolutely everything. They teemed with virtues and vices rather than, tasking the modern God with modern ethics. So it failed to set us up there.
All right. Well, this brings up lots of issues, and so I'd like to address a few more than what Jordan said. As this is a Jung reading group, I want to start with what is God, and the issue is that no one has seen God in the physical world. They may have thought they did, as they did in biblical times, but in actuality, what they saw was a vision or a dream, or well, that's basically it. It was either a dream or a vision, I guess.
Well, yeah, a dream or a theosophic vision, which is basically an awakening.
And Dr. Jung's point was that we all carry this God within us. In other words, God is a part of us, and as a result of that, we formulate within ourselves, whether we know it or not, we formulate some God. Okay, and so there is a religious function within the human being, and that's quite real. Okay, and so this isn't a question of whether or not God is real. God is certainly real, but God is something other than what most of us were taught in Sunday school, I would say. I was taught God's up there, the devil's down there, etc. Well, even if you go to the worst public high school in the world, you're going to have a fairly good idea that that just ain't so. But it does.
And I'd add that Sunday school version that I was taught the same. It was very petition-y. Prayer was not life affirming. It was, it basically was the adult version of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny.
Yeah. And so lots of people got sucked in by what we would call magical thinking. Even one of my daughters got sucked in that way. And she just turned 45. So it was 30 years ago that we had a very significant run-in about that over the miracle of bringing Lazarus back to life. And I had shown her a video recording of about Lazarus and what that miracle might mean, and basically it wasn't saying that it was a magical miracle. It was saying it was a number of other things, and what my interpretation of that miracle, if not then, certainly now, is that when Jesus went in to Mary and Martha, and Lazarus was lying out dead, being washed by them before burial, he simply pointed out to Lazarus, or to the women, that Lazarus was not dead, that he was still in their heart, and that hadn't changed one bit. And that's a phenomenon that I certainly adhere to after losing my brother and parents, and seeing the loss of my father-in-law, that my living interaction with those people has never changed, and it hasn't changed since the day they die, because of course they're no longer living, so their living body can't add anything. But in my heart, in my psyche, they are unchanged, and actually nothing happened on the day of their death. Except that the mortal body stopped, but their spirit obviously lives on very strongly in my heart, and I think everybody feels that way.
I mirror that altogether completely, because I think, for example, when my dad died, the memories were already blessings, but I think what happened is the memories became blessings with a capital B, and in a sense, the divinity of in perpetuity of love just set itself in the garden, and the letters became capital. And I think that's interesting, because we capitalize he or she with divine characters and allegory, etc. And that's really what I think that was the only difference, because he already lived there in my heart. But I think it's just the blessing became a capital B.
Right. And so we see that even David is struggling with this idea in paragraph 571,
Right.
where he's saying, "How long, Lord, wilt thou hide thyself forever? Shall thy wrath burn like fire? Remember how short my time is. Remember how short human life is. Wherefore hast thou made all men in vain? And Lord, where are thy former loving kindness, which by thy faithfulness thou didst swear to David?" Okay, well, I have no doubt that God swore to David. And and that was a projection. And he was, and so we can complain about it all we want, but the reality is that that God never does appear, because God is within us, and we need to recognize that and then understand its significance. And so as we talk about Ukraine today, I want to share with you a meme that was created probably by Louis LaFontaine, but in any case, it was being sent out by the Young Society of Washington for their Sunday session. And so let me just read it to you. "Today, as never before, it is important that human beings should not overlook the danger of the evil lurking within them. It is unfortunately only too real, which is why psychology must insist on the reality of evil and must reject any definition that regards it as insignificant or actually non-existent. The psychology is an empirical science and deals with realities." And so this was one dictum that Dr. Jung had through his life, which was the reality of evil and the incorrectness of the Catholic Church's dictum of privatio boni and summum bonum, because privatio boni says that evil is simply the deprivation of good. It's not a actor in its own right. And summum bonum says that God is the maximum of good. But the reality is that God has two sides, and those sides are contrary to one another, obviously, and they are quite powerful. And so we are literally seeing the reality of evil in real time today, as Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine for no good reason other than he wants it back.
And it's interesting, two things, or actually three things. In short, I think Jung also has a quote, I can't remember it exactly, but it says, "Where love ends, destruction begins, and terror, and etc." But right. It's the kind of thing where he's actually then saying, speaking to the importance of that. And I remember a friend of mine in college, someone with magical thinking was talking to him and trying to convert him. And he was very staunch in his faith, but he also didn't take it so seriously as to play the magical thinking game, and get lost in that. And he just looked over, he said, "No, you haven't seen God. God is so big and so there, you can't see him. You're talking about beyond and larger. he said, and you're talking about that, those are abstracts. You're trying to use them in personified human terms. It's so big and so there, you can't see it. You can't see him. You can't see. And then he said her, just to kind of push a point on the person to, piss them off so they leave. But, because he knew they didn't know about Shekinah or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But back to the, divinity of the Ukrainian spirit. My favorite thing I've seen is a Ukrainian woman just, a Russian soldier, putting his gun like this to push her back. And she came up and stopped. And she said, I suggest you put a handful of sunflowers in your pocket so that when you die here soon, something beautiful will replace you. So there's no, it's not about not backing down. And it's not about a struggle with an existential angst of, well, is it okay to protect my country? These people are parents of their own adults, and they step up. You look at the first Black Greco-Roman wrestler, and who's also the first person. There's the first Ukrainian one in the Olympics, who was their first person in their parliament. And you look at the two world heavyweight champion boxers, and there's no question. I mean, one of them said, I have no choice, but it wasn't, I have no choice as if I'm tyrannically forced to. I have no choice, meaning this is the right thing to do, to step up and bear arms. And
right. And
I so admire their spirit.
Well, and there's no doubt. And one young man was being interviewed last night on CNN, and he said 2 days ago, I was a bookkeeper and had no thought of taking up arms in this matter. And, something changed in me. And now I see very strongly that I have to defend my country. And, the only person in Russia that really cares that the former Soviet Union be reestablished is Vladimir Putin. And it occurred to me that maybe this guy is somewhat autistic. Maybe Putin is somewhat autistic, because he doesn't seem to have much. He doesn't seem to have much affect in his face, and he doesn't feel. Pardon, he doesn't feel what the average human feels. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought that up until this week, and also he's either a 7th or 8th degree black belt in Taekwondo, which to me, on the good or the evil side, that's just going to strengthen the staunchness. But his eyes this week had this rage that was not new, that was enduring. And I felt this week, I stopped armchair psychologizing him. And though it may be true that we can, even in that last quote, that meme you read, that psychology should avoid basically dispensing with the word evil, that it does truly exist. And the counterpoint to that is, I know there are NATO considerations about why other countries can't support or won't support. They don't want to get dragged in, so to speak. So that I think, Washington is actually handling it relatively brilliantly, because the only person who wants World War III is Putin, and no one else really does. He's in a basically a prehistoric time frame, as it would go. Yeah. But two things that happened this week were, to me, of chief interest. The mask mandate here came down, and the later that day, the war started. And I was like, oh yeah, out of the fridge into the frying pan instead of the frying pan into the fire. Right. But Collective Anonymous declared internet war on Russia. Yeah. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, this is a different kind of guerrilla warfare. It's not going to come from guerrilla warfare on the ground. Yeah. It's the creativity comes back in. And then I don't know who it was in the Ukraine called Elon Musk and said, can you get us your Starlight satellite internet? 10 hours later, Elon Musk was back and said, done. So the whole, Russia taking them down. And then within 2 or 3 hours, no author was announced, but Ukrainian songs had been hacked. The Russian TV and radio had been hacked into, and Ukrainian songs were being played continuously. And that it feels like that was probably anonymous.
Well,
So it kind of quickly went the other way in regards.
You have to appreciate the humor in it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and those are psychological tactics, and that's a tide going a whole other way.
Right. But what we see here is a whole bunch of things happening unconsciously that people a week ago wouldn't have expected. One is that the collective of the world is basically against Putin, and and that is became seriously strengthened in the last week, and it's destined to become much more strengthened. I mean, when the soldiers out on Snake Island told the Russian military ship "F you," and then died, or the different ideas whether they were captured or died. Whatever it was, that was a wake-up call. I mean, that's like the Alamo, right?
Right.
And so that will never be forgotten. That, especially if those men died on Snake Island, that will never be forgotten. There will be memorials to them for the next 1,000 years. And I just point to the Alamo and rest my case. And
then right after that, the gentleman who stayed with the bomb to make sure the bridge was completely destroyed, so the advancing Russian tanks couldn't cross.
Right. And the other thing that's happened is that Putin has seriously solidified the American psyche. And Donald Trump is done. When Putin attacked Ukraine, and somebody make me eat my words 2-3 years from now when the general election occurs, or 2.5 years from now. But Donald Trump has been feeding his followers a bill of goods for since he started his political career, and I'm convinced he was helped by Putin, and he's just a second, I need to admit Joel. And now people are seeing that it's baloney, and they're going to see it more and more as these hearings for the January 6th commission get going. It doesn't matter whether Donald Trump has ever prosecuted, as the old saying goes, stick a fork in him, he's done.
Well, yeah, and there's good morning, Joel. And
good morning.
Morning.
And there's also the piece of did Trump personally hire all the internet IT people for his truth or whatever, his competition against Twitter and Facebook, because that's a technological disaster. And I mean, I could go in with probably Wix and set up an app better than they 300,000 or 400,000 people waiting list. It's like he's personally having to admit them in one by one. I mean, yeah. So it's even that comes across as just rank amateur instead of rank in the military. There's a difference of discipline between the amateur and the professional. And I think that he is very much even on the outside in terms of marketing, even these days, which that's so important with soundbite land. If you're going to manipulate people by, drips of jewels that don't really exist, well, they at least have to be pretty and shiny, and his products aren't. They're messy and they're irregular and amateur.
And and there will be resolution. That's the play that we're working on for our confluence, and there will be reconciliation with a lot of people, because a lot of people will say, well, I got distracted by all the glitter of the Trump world and didn't realize how selfish this man is. And
Yeah.
and Putin, okay, he's got surface tension in Russia where everybody's afraid to say anything. Stalin achieved that also, but and he murdered 20 million people. But ultimately, he collapsed, and Stalinism did collapse, and the Soviet Union just collapsed of its own weight back in 1990. There was no physical war per se, but there were some physical wars, which, if you take Vietnam as a hot battle in the Cold War, yeah, there was that. But basically, we just ran him out of money, and so Putin has no chance, because he has an economy that's the size of Italy, against the United States and Western Europe combined, the combined economic power. And so nobody's
Well,
going to do
what's so
business.
dangerous? That's what's so dangerous and tenuous by the new. I mean, the Russian Sino at odds is historic. So the Russian Sino collaboration, that's almost like him reaching out to have an admin as, here, let me go shake hands to have an economy. And the problem with that is China has their own economy. Yeah. So I'm kind of also thinking China has a lot more power in terms of military than we might even know in places, that because of their economy, they have for over a decade systematically practiced building high-rise buildings in 12 hours or 24 hours. And so they're really good at this infrastructure piece, except they are, in a sense, artificially propped up in a way. So, by the little green electron paper money or just mythical money. But so in a sense, the one who's trying to go for the bluff, Putin, is trying to get the one who has the money bluff and actual money through China. So, but the thing is, those two, my thought is, well, why in the right mind would China think that they need Russia rather than the other way around? Because they're not the new kid on the block. They're just the new kid who is stepped up to position 1, 2, and 3 on the block.
Right. Okay. There are a number of comments that are valid comments here, and I want to read them from especially from Dushan Shabad. He says, there was a genocide of Russians in eastern Ukraine. Putin had to put an end to that. He said, quote unquote, yeah, all right. The world is, Anders says, the world is massively connected today. Even people from both Russia and Ukraine share the same social media. And Dushan says, apart from that, NATO was putting military installations aimed at Moscow all over Ukraine, also training young Ukrainians to hate Russians. NATO seems to have cooked up a really bad conflict this time around. Hopefully it doesn't bite them in the A. And then Conscious Being says, I have a Russian friend that told me most of Russian disagree with Putin's decision to invade Ukraine.
And there have been protests in Russia that are, for Russian standards, pretty sizable.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to defer Kathy Kerr's comment for a minute while I comment on Dushan's. There's always, she said, there's always finger pointing and blaming other people for your attitudes, whatever they are. But this is what Dr. Jung was pressing for throughout his career, was to analyze yourself, look to yourself first. And, there's no question that if you get things like the things that are at the level of the Russian-Ukraine conflict going in your own mind, that you'll find lots of things that, either justify doing something against the other, or justify you ignoring it and pretending it's not happening. But the reality is, it's within the collective unconscious of all of us to make a difference. And so, we can come up with all kinds of excuses why people are angry with one another, but in the end, the result here is going to come out of the collective unconscious. And right now, as I look at what's been going on the last few months, it really smells like the Guns of August to me. And if you're not familiar with the Guns of August, I urge you to go to Amazon and buy yourself a copy. Okay. And I forget who it was. I guess it was Kennedy, who very early in his presidency read the Guns of August and realized what happens if you let these things go too far. So, the criticism of Biden, for example, I think he's got a lot of wisdom, because if we do everything we could do to the Russian people right now, and we don't have a war with the Russian people, I certainly don't. But if the United States, did everything that is non-combat to the Russian people right now, then what would happen is that the Russian people would rise up in arms against us. And so Mr. Biden has a very delicate situation to face, which is, how do I get Putin to back down or get something to change without making everybody in Russia be our enemy, which they are not.
Yeah, and that hits home the point. Like I think maybe as Kathy may have been saying, but not blame storming. Because if you go looking for trouble, you're going to find it. If you go looking for whatever you go looking for, you're going to find it, because you're going to fabricate it as an expectation. You'll see it in everything, except then that's seeing fictions. And this is really not the American people against the Russian people. This is Putin. I mean, I'll stop right there with this is just Putin. And so it's not government against government. That's why I think Biden has such a beautiful position, but at the same time, a tricky, simple, detailed one, as well as big a one, to be judicious and to, basically bide his time in a way.
Yeah.
Because I think
he has to. And remembering what happened in the Guns of August, we're talking about the run up to World War I, which was June and July of 1914. And Dr. Jung, one of the things that Dr. Jung talks about in the Red Book is that from I think it was from November 12th of 1913 on, he was having huge, big dreams about something happening in Europe, because obviously there was a lot of angst about it. It was unconscious. It was below the surface of consciousness, but there was a lot of stuff going on at the unconscious level. And so you wouldn't think that simply the assassination of one leader, Archduke Ferdinand,
Franz
would
Ferdinand.
start, huh?
Franz Ferdinand, right?
Yeah, would start World War I, but nonetheless, that's what happened, because once that occurred, then the leaders of the European countries started to do tit for tat, and this guy is wrong, and so I'm going to do this to him. I'm just going to fire a few salvos over this way, and that'll make me feel better. And then somebody else says, oh, well, I think I'll fire a few salvos the other way. And these guns had been built up over quite some time, including into the 19th century. And the result was that it was one thing led to another until we had full-scale war on the European continent, and we call that now World War I. And so
Or scaled up, built up in the 20th century, right? But still,
say it again.
I think you mentioned into the 19th century, but
I meant the 19th century. So going back, these forces, and I'm talking about psychological forces that were developing, probably were developing from at least the mid 19th century. I mean, that's what that poem that the fellow wrote during his honeymoon said. I'll think of the poem in a minute, and I'll find it and we'll read it. But
thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, it was Matthew Arnold. Okay, Matthew Arnold was feeling it in 1853 when he wrote his famous poem, and I'll pull it up here in a minute. And I'll give you guys a chance to talk, but I want to cover a couple more points here. I want to bring this forward to this time. There are plenty of things that we could do. Okay, for the last 20 years, I've been saying, what are we spending all this defense money for? Okay, because in the United States, and I realized shortly after 1998 that the U.S. defense budget was like double and maybe tripling. Okay, and so the Cold War that went up until 91, I guess, was at one expense level, but by 98 or so, we were spending twice as much. And by the time the Gulf Wars, the second Gulf War started, I think we're probably close to 3 times as much as at the end of the Cold War. And I did a few searches. I said, okay, how many more aircraft carriers do we have? Well, we built one more in the first decade of the 2000s. So an aircraft carrier costs $10 billion to build, and it costs $10 billion to put its air wing on it. So that's 20 billion. So where's all the other money going? And right. So I said, okay, so we increased, when the Gulf War started, we increased the Marine Corps by 25,000 men. Well, you can equip and field 25,000 men for a decade with $10 billion. And so, okay, there's another 10 billion. So now we're up to 30 billion and a few other capital ships, I suppose. But we did not build 10 carriers. We built one. And so in early 1990 or 91, we were at the height of the Cold War. We were spending $400 billion on defense. That number is way up. It's over 800 billion now. So the question is, where have we been putting that money? Okay, and the answer seems to be, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, the answer seems to be into cyber. Okay, and we created Cyber Command about maybe 20 years ago, something like that. And we've been putting a huge amount of money into cyber. They've built a building dedicated to it at the Naval Academy now, and that's operational. And so you know that the U.S. military is focusing on cyber very heavily. Okay, and the result of that must be that, you know, notwithstanding Putin can reach out and touch us with cyber, we can also reach out and touch him very seriously. We can shut him down. And
there's a chess match and a strategy, like a mano a mano there. I had a friend that had his own internet security business, and his interview, when someone said, well, we're interested in a proposal, he said, I don't do proposals. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk out in the parking lot in my car and I'm going to get in your system. And if I can, within 20 minutes, then here's the address to send the money and I'll start work. But what it was, you know, he's going to go out there and mano a mano from the mano, and electronics hand to hand, you know, and 10 minutes later, he looks up, you know, and the CEO's going like this, waving at him in his car with a thumbs up, like, yeah, I just got your email through my own intranet.
Right.
You know?
Interestingly, Oleg Rosman, who has been on this network or this channel many times, just says, hello, greetings from Ukraine.
Yeah, good to see you.
So we're glad you're here.
Best up to you.
Yeah, he says we still alive. I'm delighted to hear.
That's a good thing. Thanks for chiming out.
Thank you for letting us know. Like that's the best thing I've heard today. So my point is that in terms of the Guns of August, what led to World War I was a series of events that got worse and worse and worse until all of a sudden, boom, we're in World War I. And notwithstanding the bravado of Mr. Putin and maybe the bravado of some of his techies, you know, if we aim American technical excellence on them and start a real war, then they're in serious trouble. And Putin knows that. And he also knows that he cannot use nuclear weapons because we won't use them unless he does. But if he does, then Katie bar the door. Okay, it's, you know, back in the late 80s and early 90s, I was always worried about this scenario where somebody could accidentally launch a missile and or get control of the missile, or you know, AI could get control of the missiles and see a false attack that isn't real, but it looks like it's real, and then launch our missiles. And so I was very worried about that, honestly. And I went to the National War College, and I was talking about that with an Army Major General who was in my class, believe it or not. Of course, this was the National War College that I was at. And he said, don't worry about that. The U.S. won't launch on warning. And so what that means is that, you know, we don't just, you know, shoot off a nuke just for grins. And this is something that Donald Trump didn't understand. He said, why don't we use nukes and go nuke Iran or something like that, right? And the answer is that the powers that be within the U.S. government, and they're very powerful. They're even more powerful than a president, in a sense, because they understand these issues, and they've read the Guns of August, certainly the people that control our nukes, and they won't launch them on warning. But if ever a nuke were to be detonated, however that's done in the United States, then stand by. Whoever did that is going to be in the next dimension very soon. And because we can't allow too much of that to happen. If I think the numbers are now, well, there's dispute whether it's 23 nukes or 100 nukes. That scientists agree if there were 100 nukes, let's say it's 100, exploded in the atmosphere, then everything on the planet dies. Okay, everything dies, not just human beings, but the planet becomes a dead planet. And that's if only one, huh?
I was saying that in tandem with one of the reasonings where, unfortunately, the ocean is our trash can and the earth underground our trash can. There have been over 2,200 tests. That's why they're not done.
They weren't done in the atmosphere, though. But yes, I mean, we stopped that in, I don't know, 1962 or something like that with the nuclear test ban treaty. Still, there are some people like Kim Jong-il who threaten and have created their own nukes, but it's just very dangerous to play that. I mean, if North Korea did anything that involved an actual explosion in either the United States or Japan, even if it was a mistake, Kim Jong-il and all of his family would be just gone. So that would be over. Okay. Because that just, it's just crazy. I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't need infantry. I mean, the Marine Corps, every Marine is an infantry men first, because you need infantry to do things, and it's not all big picture stuff. And so, I'm very proud of the fact that if you look at the Marine Band, and there's this woman piccolo player, for example, in the Marine Band, and she's like 5'3" and weighs 95 pounds or something like that. But she too is an infantryman, and she is required every year in order to stay in the Marine Corps to rifle qualify and be trained and to undergo basic infantry training. All those bandsmen, they didn't just say, here's a nice red uniform. We're going to teach you to march, and then you be in the Marine Band. Oh, no. It doesn't work that way. And those bandsmen have served in combat zones also. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to make here is that we are at the brink of a Guns of August type of situation, which it could get worse by degrees until such time as we're all in a war. So we can't think that this is just an interesting television series that we're watching. Oh, no, we're all at risk in this deal, and we all have to wake up, and whatever we can do, even if it's prayer, we have to do that. And prayer is powerful. I mean, this is what Dr. Jung's point is, that if we are aware that God is the collective unconscious, then what we say makes a difference. Now, I will shut up and I will find Matthew Arnold's poem. Okay.
No, I think I like you going on at length with that. I would like to not counter, but provide some surface tension, I think, on this side. That's one of the things I admire most about the Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian spirit and the Ukrainian strength is you see a people who just turn and they don't ask permission. Dad, can I hit this guy in the face who just killed this other? They do what they need to do. And I think that counters what I've seen as the American hubris, where, that'll all just be wiped off the planet. Well, that starts to be a bluff too, even though it's true. Because when we see the American people, the military is certainly trained, but the people have had a certain trained to be a little bit lazy, and me included. I mean, we haven't had war on our soil. I hope we don't, other than the Civil War, and that was more about cotton and sugar and whoever had the money. But I think that I see what's happening in Ukraine, and from the first instant, they turned to face the trouble. And instead of, as I think Kathy was commenting, that they're not blame storming, they're not making excuses of someone else's problem. They're dealing directly with what they are experiencing, and they are seeing it clearly, and they are taking their own amends, not just to sit there and try to survive. I feel like the Ukrainians tried to thrive. So this is more thrival than survival, because they have this beautiful spirit of life and belief in their culture and architecture. And I mean, look at their president. He was a comedian and a dancer, and they have people in their parliament, that Greco-Roman and former Greco-Roman Olympic wrestler, couple of heavyweight champion boxers. Their politicians come from life, and very strong life, whereas a lot of our politicians come from who talked a good game but can't box, so to speak. So I think to lie in right in tandem with you, but I think also our military has might, but I think we also have billboarded a lot, and I think our hubris can take a good solid lesson from the honesty of the Ukrainian strength in their people.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so here's Dover Beach. The poem is called Dover Beach. I'll share it. I'm going to share the Wikipedia entry of it while I read it, in the interest of letting everybody also read the commentary. But here's Dover Beach. And so this was from 1851. Matthew Arnold was a pastor, and he was on his honeymoon. And here's the poem that he created. And I'll start so that people don't have to look it up. They'll be able to stop this video to see it, but I'm just going to read the poem. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet, sweet is the night air, only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon-bleached, blanched land. Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles, which the waves draw back and fling. At their return, up the strand, begin and cease, then again begin, with tumulus cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round her shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear, the naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true. to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful jewel that you pulled out there, that it's timeless and applies now.
Yeah, it absolutely applies now, and it has been applying for many years, of course, because there's lots of stuff, let's say, build up in the psyche of not only Ukrainians, but also Russians. And let's see, Oleg says, if you want to understand the Ukrainians' mentality, you could compare us with Irish, Scottish, Greeks, or Latin American people. We are mostly irrationalists, crazy, and we too are much individualists. Yeah, I don't doubt it. And pretty much
Well, what I love about that is that's blowtorch land, which is beautiful. I mean, they can play the crazy untamed flame until they need it, and then they tune it, and it's a cutting torch. And then they go back to life. But that beautiful irrationalist, I mean, that's a way to live and not tire, and actually to keep strong. I mean, everything in moderation, including moderation. I mean, yeah, thank you for that, Oleg. I appreciate that. The crazy irrationalist individualist, that, that's an open, untuned flame. But then when necessary, you guys turn that nozzle, and that flame becomes a blowtorch and a cutting tool.
Okay, there's a lot of good commentary here on YouTube. I can't really address it all, I don't think. Kathy says, how can the world allow this to stand after all we've been through historically? Surely that's the question. And she says, what if they're so capable of evil that they will do what they aim to do at any cost, including their life, their family, and their planet? Well, Kathy, I would say this. God works in mysterious ways. And, as appears probable, Ukraine may well fall to the Russians. I suppose, in the next few days. I know that Oleg doesn't like to hear that, and I apologize for that, Oleg. But the reality is that the country may fall. But what I see is ultimately the end of the Putin regime, because he's overstepped his bounds by quite a margin. And everybody knows it in the world. And so there are inevitably going to be cracks in his armor at home. There already are. The fact that there are big demonstrations in Russia says that there are, okay, because Russia didn't experience, as I did, the demonstrations of against the Vietnam War back in the 60s. But, I've been through that process, and, all that has to happen is for Putin to crack down on the Russian people as a result of those demonstrations, and they will end him one way or another. And I just think back of the Kent State shooting where the National Guard, I forget how many they killed. They killed either 1 or 4 people. But, that was really the beginning of the end of the Vietnam War when that happened at Kent State. You can look it up in Wikipedia.
That when the dog turns to bite the hand that feeds that's, the end is nigh.
Right, right,
So, pardon, Joel, go ahead.
right. Go ahead, Joel. I'd like to hear your comments on these things.
Okay. Let's take back when you told about Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassination.
Yeah,
It is curious that the organization that murdered him had the name of the Black Hand.
yeah,
This name, Black Hand, points us to the collective shadows aspects of Europe. And I think that we are dealing, and I think that we should look back also to Crimea War, Crimean
War, which was about the
Crimean
time.
War.
It was about,
Yes.
it was just after Matthew Arnold wrote his poem that the Crimean War took place. Go ahead.
The Crimean War, because I think that we are dealing with a 19th century war, the unfoldings of the Crimean War in 21st century with technological resources provided by 21st century. And there is a comment talking about the archetype of the tree of life, a commentary in the group.
Yeah,
And this is curious because I think that we do not have the knowledge of good and evil. We have the presumption of the knowledge of good and evil, and that's quite different. And I think that what archetype is talking, what kind of archetype are we dealing with, for example, Putin? What sort of Czar is Putin? Because the word Czar came from the word Caesar.
came from what? I'm sorry, say the last word again.
Caesar?
The word Caesar,
Oh, okay.
Roman
Caesar.
Empire.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the army, the Russian army is called the Red Army. And the soldiers of the Roman Empire used red in the uniforms, in the flags also. But I think that we are dealing with an unfolding, historical unfoldings of Crimean War. And we should go back and reread about what Jung wrote with a deeper comprehension of the collective unconscious and how this thing historically, the historical actualization of these archetypes. Because, and I think that I like very much when you said that we all are at war. This is everybody, all the world were reached by this war. And I remember when Katie, the comment of Katie remembered me, Jung, when he wrote the symbols of transformation, that he said that I don't remember the paragraph, but Jung wrote that civilization is a varnish. Is that a varnish?
Yeah, it's varnish, right?
A shade, a fine shade, and underlying this shade, this varnish, we have the primitive man.
Sure.
And I think that we are dealing today with these two pair of opposites. The extremely technological versus the extremely primitive. And that is why those things happens and still are happening.
Right. Yeah, I recall in the, and this is what happens to me. Images come into my mind from movies. I recall in the movie Patton, in the very beginning speech.
Patton.
Patton.
Okay.
The tank commander of
I
the
saw
Third
this
Army.
movie 6 times.
Oh, I've seen it 100 times. I probably have seen it 100 times. I can recite
Who's
the
Pat?
dialogue.
What the guy say?
Yeah.
Jordan.
But anyway.
After I answered this week, I recently bought a book. This book sold millions of copies, and the title of this book is "Ask to Skip Answers." All the questions about collective and personal unconscious sold millions while the road.
Yeah.
That's
What's the title again?
Asks to Escape.
Could you put it in the? Could you put the name in the chat?
The name. Okay.
Yeah, put the name in the chat. Okay, so I wanted to finish my comment about
Well, I appreciate
Patton.
what Joel said. Because,
Pardon?
if we don't know history, we're just repeat it.
Yeah.
But Joel said the knowledge of good and evil versus the presumption of the knowledge of good and evil. The first one has experiential in parentheses, the actual direct knowing of good and evil versus the presumption of knowing good and evil. And I think that's one of the things in America is that the intensities of conflict, I'm glad we haven't had as many. I mean, to experience. That's something
You're glad we haven't had a what?
So many like warring conflicts, on our soil, so that we don't live like Beirut. You walk down the street and the building blows up. I mean, we don't have that trauma kind of thing, but it also makes the good and evil somewhat into an unexperienced abstract rather than a direct knowing of the good and evil. So I appreciate what Joel said, the knowledge of good and evil versus the presumption of the knowledge of good and evil. Presumption being the fabrication. It's an abstract. We haven't actually experienced almost dying on a mountain. We've just seen a movie or read stories about, kind of thing. And I think that's an important distinction that Joel had made.
Right. Well, let's I want to go back to Patton and his speech at the beginning of the movie, where Patton is speaking, and this speech actually occurred. I've seen photographs of him giving it. He's talking to a bunch of green troops who haven't yet been in the battle, and he's trying to, strengthen their resolve by what he says, by his speech, and one of the phrases that he says is, "When you put your hand in a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do." Okay, I'll say it again. When you put your hand into a bunch of goo that moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do. Okay, so that's a archetypal switch. I can assure you that that does happen. Okay, when you're being trained in the military, they can talk to you at your logic level about what is going to happen and what you have to do. But until you've actually been in battle and experienced that and seen how your own resolve changes, like that young man I talked about earlier, who was, last Wednesday, he was a bookkeeper, and now he's a soldier in the Ukrainian army, or the Ukrainian partisans, military forces. And his attitude is entirely changed. I mean, those people know what they have to do now. And, Putin has asked, he may take over the country and install a puppet, but that's only going to be the beginning, not the end, not by any means.
Well, and I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that actually the current Ukrainian president and his family are intact and not just survive, but that this becomes a shining example of why a bluff is dangerous.
And Joel has put this comment, which I am grateful for, but he's put it on he's put it on the Zoom. But he says, after answer to Job, read asked to skip answers. Subtitle, everything you need to know about personal and collective unconscious and its unfolding. Skip answers. Number one book on the New York list. Yeah, it could happen. I've been thinking about another book, actually, which is something that I'm going to put this onto the YouTube chat as well. So that
God answers and skip answers.
Yeah.
Like volume 1 and volume 2.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's beautiful. Thank you, Joel.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, this is from our colleague Joel, which I very much appreciate. And there's news. I should bring you the news about our confluence and our beloved goddess, Colleen Kibert, who is now home from her surgery, which was last Wednesday, and she's resting at home. Pardon?
Glad to hear.
Yeah, and she's telling us that within a couple of weeks she'll be back in touch with us, and we have to stay away. And I had an email earlier in the week from her daughter saying, "You're not coming here next weekend. No way." No way are you coming here. You're going to stay away, because she knows that if any of the Jungian people like me come around Colleen's house, then Colleen will get very excited about that, and will want to be a part of it, and which I agree and I acknowledge. And
she's taking a tempered look at her healing and understanding that she would love to do that too, but that right now it might not be the best thing.
Right. And her daughter is saying, just don't come. And so that was easy enough, because Tim was already in Carmel, is in Carmel now. And so we just moved our rehearsal from Aptos, we moved it south to Carmel. And so I will be going on Thursday to the Bay Area in order to have this rehearsal. And so we will all on Friday be going to Carmel and spend that next weekend. So there will not be a group this group will not meet next Sunday.
Sunday.
Okay. Sunday, because and probably not Monday either, because I'm going to be traveling.
Traveling or
Pardon? And,
traveling,
yeah, the advanced reading group will meet both this Wednesday and next Wednesday, because I'll be back. So the advanced group will meet both times, but this group and next week's Monday group, not tomorrow, but next week, are not going to happen because of our Carmel deal.
And the dates, speaking of that too, just for everyone out there, the dates of the confluence
are 10 to 14 June 2022 in Helena, Montana. I'm going to put the details.
By the way, I must tell you, I had a dream about Montana.
You did?
I did.
And?
It was a very clear dream. In the dream, I was in Montana, near a forest, but I saw you and a group of 15 people, and then you went to a woman, a little bit shorter than you, with gray hair, and near the forest, and you told that woman, Joel said that we have to work the feminine. And then she shake her head like this, okay. And then she told back to you, let's do it so. And it happened a workshop about the feminine. That was the dream. That was the dream.
That woman must have been Colleen, I suppose. It's interesting that you talk about the forest, because one of the things that we're going to do on the Friday, which is June 10th, the starting day, even before the official start of the confluence, the official start is going to be around 7:30 in the evening, but we're going to have a heavy hors d'oeuvres dinner starting at about 6 at Tim's studio. But before that, we are going to do a tour up into the mountains near Helena, where there are what Tim calls dolmens, which are these huge stones like Stonehenge, even bigger than Stonehenge, way bigger than Stonehenge, that were discovered only about 5 years ago out in the mountains of Helena and
I
around Helena.
And a creek, C-R-E-E-K.
What T-R? Say it again.
A creek, C from car, C-R-E-E-K.
Yeah.
Tall trees with a creek. I don't know if a small river, a little river.
Creek. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, small creek, yeah.
And a group of 15 people, and you in the head, and you talk to a woman shorter than you. Yes, it fits
That's a sign, Joel. You have to be coming. You have to come to Helena.
Oh my! I think that the luminous will happen.
Yep. I hope so. We want to see you and have the benefit of your wisdom. I'll show you what I did in order to deal with my own anxiety about Colleen's surgery. And I told her I was going to do this, that I wanted to do something which would keep me close to her on Tuesday when she went in for the pre-op, and then Wednesday when she had her surgery. And the surgery was quite serious. It was replacement of 2 heart valves. So it's non-trivial. So what I did during this period was I created for her a memento mori mala. And as many of the followers of this YouTube channel will know from a video called Skip Sans Persona, I had a mala of white skulls, where it was a bracelet, or it is a bracelet. And last November, and the purpose of it in Buddhism is also, in effect, the same thing as memento mori. So last November, when I was in Aptos at Colleen's house, I actually gave her my mala, but unfortunately, it was a little bit trashed at that time, and I asked her if she could have one of her the cleaning ladies at her house repair it for her. But after November, I got quite embarrassed that I had given her this defective mala. And so I taught myself how to make a mala. And so I'm going to share with you the mala that I made for her and how I described it to her. I'll tell you how I described it. So this is the mala that I created starting on Tuesday. I told her I would do it on Tuesday and Wednesday, which I did. And I've actually sent this to her by mail. And let me interrupt for a moment. Oleg, Gambate, good luck. We hope you succeed. And
yes, good luck, Oleg, and best of life. Best of memento mori to intensify your life while you have.
Right. And so Oleg says here that, okay, tonight we're gonna fight again. The enemy will try to take Kyiv for 24 hours from north because the Monday will be horrific for Russian economy. Putin is in a panic. Wish us luck. Yeah, luck. Kathy, thank you for your blessings.
Yeah, 2022 of the Russian billionaires lost $29 billion this week. So yeah, that when the market opens on Monday, he's absolutely right.
Right. Yeah, I would think that the Russian stock market is going to be in a shambles for sure. Okay.
Well, and specifically, 22 Russian billionaires lost $29 billion in under 24 hours. So
yeah, I don't doubt it. They're going to lose a lot more before they're done.
Yeah, that's just dropping in the bucket.
Yeah.
So back to the mala you've got here.
Right. So Oleg, this mala is also, since I'm sending you an image of it, it's for you as well. But in any case, what this mala represents, the tassel is purple, and that represents a spiritual purple. Most of the beads on it are blue, and that represents the fact that most people at the time of their death do reach enlightenment. You know, it'd be really peachy though if they would even be enlightened a little bit before their death. The four silver beads represent wholeness, and they also represent those of us who are willing to contribute to the collective, to make a change. The other colored beads that are in this mala, there are 7 of them. There are 2 green, they represent the American GOP, the American Republican Party. And so the 2 green ones, and by the way, the reason that there's 7 is because it represents the proportion that the GOP represents to the American electorate, to keep in mind, because this mala has 27 beads in it, and a normal full-size mala has 108 beads. So if you use this mala, which is a mini mala, I would say, if you use this mala, if you go 4 times around, you've done 108, which is the traditional number of beads in a full-size Buddhist mala, and in other traditions, the 108 is also used. So this mala has 27. If you go 4 times around, you've completed 1 mala, 1 full-size mala. And so 7, if you multiply 7 by 4, you get 28. And that 28 represents the 28% of the American electorate, which are members of the GOP, who are registered as Republicans. And so the 2 green ones represent the people who are within the Republican Party, but they're a little sick of the party's shenanigans right now. The 2 orange beads represent hard-headed Dutchmen who had enough, and those are, there are a lot of investment bankers up on Wall Street, by tradition, have been of Dutch extraction because of the fact that the Dutch settled Manhattan, and so there's a lot of Dutch genes in the Manhattan communities. So that represents hard-headed Dutchmen, who are also fed up. The 2 red beads represent people who are incorrigible and will never change. And the 1 purple bead represents members of the Republican Party who have already changed, and have changed since 2016, which is clear from the 2020 election when Joe Biden won by 7 million votes. And so those members of the Republican Party are represented by that purple bead. And so it represents, just to keep in perspective, even though the talking heads on television keep wanting to make it seem like it's a NFL football game where the decision is going to be made in the last 2 minutes, which obviously happens. The reality is that, the Republican Party is in a serious minority in the United States, and whether they can win another election or not is an open question. So anyway, so I completed that mala on.
Well, I think that's a good,
Wednesday.
I'm glad you brought that up that way, because I think one thing America needs to I don't want to say be presumptuous, needs to. I'm not going to go that route. I think one thing that would be healthy for America is to separate politics from sports, because it's not the soundbite, it's not the adrenaline, it's not the excitement. Politics are typically, in a healthy way, in a society in that civilization varnish, there for long-term benefits, positivity, and evolution of society, rather than the bam, 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 bam on Saturday or Sunday, and it's not a rah, rah, we're number one game. It's a how can we be better than we were yesterday game.
Mhm. Yeah. And so unless Putin collapses from his own getting stuffed on his own petard, which I think is quite possible, I think what's going to go on in Ukraine is going to take a long time. And in the end, I think the Russian people themselves will demand that Russia withdraw, not the Ukrainian people, but the Russian people themselves, when they start seeing the consequences to them of what Putin is doing.
And they use the same social media, which is interesting. They have different language, but Russia and Ukraine have the same social media systems. So they are already friends, in bed with each other, so to speak. I mean, it's not a different, new, exclusive connection that's just happening now. They have a very, very established history together.
Yeah.
Socially, technically. I mean,
right. And so, Jordan, did you read paragraph 572 when I was busy earlier? Because I think that
I don't think so. In fact, I was looking at that. Let me open this back up. No, in fact, we stopped right there, in which by thy faithfulness that thou swear to David.
Right. Okay.
So
David is still praying to a God that's out there and complaining to him that he doesn't show himself, and so David is part of our species that was still seeing God out there, and that he had to be prayed to outside.
Right.
He has to be prayed to inside. But anyway, I want to read 572 because it's on our point today. So paragraph 572, had this been addressed, just a second, Joel. Had this been addressed to a human being, it would have run something like this, quote, "For heaven's sakes, man, pull yourself together and stop being such a senseless savage. It is really too grotesque to get into such a rage when it's partly your own fault that the plants won't flourish. You used to be quite reasonable and took good care of the garden you planted instead of trampling it to pieces.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So my prediction is that Mr. Putin is going to find out that he is a man, not a god. And he may find that out in a very tough way. Let's see.
What I love about that last part, you used to be quite reasonable and took good care of the garden you planted instead of trampling it to pieces. And the one thing about a gardener, you notice when things begin to naturalize and poke their noses up in different places. And you sometimes adjust the whole walking path system in your garden to accommodate the new growth so as not to get trampled when it's, just barely pokes itself up. So you're letting things subtly move around and shift themselves to acclimate in a natural way and then support that. I mean, you used to be quite reasonable and take care of the garden you planted. That's part of that is day-to-day changes to address, well, Dad, why does this happen? And you turn to your daughter and you say, everything stops and there's the there's the place.
Right. Now, Kathy has said this is the real reason why we need to stay armed in the U.S. Look at how things change overnight. Citizens have, can, and do become subjects. I'll offer my perspective on this. We already have 350 million, if not more, guns out there in the United States. And it's not a question of protecting ourselves from one another in the normal day-to-day wheel. And it's certainly not a question of defending ourselves from our government in the normal course of things. Because I mean, I have a friend who claims to have 50 guns. Well, 50 guns does you precious little good if you can only use one at a time. And also, if it's the citizen up against our own government, our government has tanks and F-18s, F-35s, and so on. So if we think we're going to successfully fight our own government on an individual basis, if an individual were to act out, and therefore the government wants to arrest him, for example, he's going to be arrested or dead. Very simply, one individual. You're not going to protect yourself from the government in that way.
And that's fourth on January 6th, where they get to the well of the Senate, and now what? This was a sandbox. This was an exercise for a yellow bucket and a blue shovel in a sandbox that should have never left that sandbox. They had no business being there.
Right. And so, I do concur that that it's useful to have guns out there in the society. And one of my friends in Saudi Arabia said to me, Saudi Arabia is fully armed. Everybody's got guns. And, the same is true in Switzerland, which was neutral during World War II and World War I. And, every man in Switzerland has to train for the army, and they actually take their gun home, and they're actually given ammunition for their guns. But they're not supposed to crack the packaging of the ammunition. That's a crime unless called for in wartime. And so that's what Ukraine is doing. It issued guns to lots of citizens, which was the way that you have to go if you have a situation like happening here. But it isn't because you're going to fight a stand-up battle against Vladimir Putin. It's because if you have to become a partisan, then you have something to work with. In my view, we have enough guns out there in the United States, 350 million. We have more guns in the U.S. than we have people. Maybe it's 400.
And I think it should be clarified too. They had lines for the background check. They weren't just indiscriminately handing these things out.
Right.
They still are playing an expedited background check, but there still is one done. Not just anybody gets one. So I mean, there's a responsibility that they're implementing post haste to with urgency.
Right. And so from my perspective, people who think that they have to have multiple guns, I mean, unless you're sort of a traditional collector or something, and you do it as
or a hunter, and that's your primary food source.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to have multiple guns for hunting. I mean, my ancestors had a one-shot musket, and They did quite well. You don't have to kill a deer with a semi-automatic weapon. That's not very sportsmanlike.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, but it's the same time, a handgun carried by a hunter is usually kind of like a spare tire in the trunk. I mean, if something comes out of nowhere, a long rifle is not close quarter weaponry. So,
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's fine to have a
and
rifle and a pistol, and for hunting,
but it's kept snapped. I mean, it's just like, right.
But like anything, there can be too much of a good thing, and so I think the law in the state of Maryland is perfectly good, which is that you can own a gun for home protection or business protection, and you can carry. There's only one time you may carry your gun outside, and that's when you're going from business to home or home to business direct. You can't stop at the grocery store or any other such thing.
Right.
You can carry a weapon from home to work or from work to home, but you can't stop on the way. And the only other place you're allowed to carry it to and from is a target range. And other than that, you have to keep your weapon locked up, literally, in Maryland, I believe. And
well, I remember growing up in Texas having a similar thing, but the transport had to be done in the trunk. So it's not like you have instant quick access. It's carried in the trunk, which in a sense is a suitcase that's closed at the business and opened at the home, closed at the home, opened in the business, so that you don't have instant access, and it's not an indiscriminate thing. But even I think the transport was regulated, and any specialized weapons other than guns always had to be carried in the trunk. Not allowed, in the public domain, basically.
Right. So anyway, that's enough about the gun debate. I don't personally speak about whether or not I own a weapon. And
and the old joke about the right to bear arms. It's like, well, not everyone has furry forearms, I have bare arms. What's up?
I'm not going to show my tattoos. Sorry.
Yeah, I get it.
All right. Get it. Okay, let me go to paragraph 573 then. Certainly our interlocutor would never dare to remonstrate with his almighty partner about this breach of contract. He knows only too well what a row he would get into if he were the wretched breaker of the law, because anything else would put him in peril of his life. He must retire to the more exalted plane of reason. In this way, without knowing it or wanting it, he shows himself superior to his divine partner, but both intellectually and morally. Yahweh fails to notice that he is being humored, just as little as he understands why he has continually to be praised as just. He makes pressing demands on his people to be praised and propitiated in every possible way for the obvious purpose of keeping him in a good temper at any place. And so this relates to propitiation and the idea of a talisman. And the point I made to Colleen when I sent her my mala is that, she can use it as a counter for prayer and that sort of thing, but she doesn't, that's not absolutely necessary, because it's perfectly fine to just hold it in her hand and watch television in that same way. That keeps her spiritually comforted. and it doesn't require any specific religious tradition to do that.
Right.
And Tim commented to me that this is a talisman, and I had to admit I didn't know what a talisman is, but it's an apotropaic device. It's like a rabbit's foot or something. And yeah, okay, it's like
Right.
a rabbit's foot, and it's, you know, if you're up against the Russian army, it may be just as strong as a rabbit's foot. But on the other hand, for my purposes in keeping my own psyche together while Colleen was in her surgery and now in her recovery, it gives me comfort to know that she has this, whether or not she uses it at all or leaves it in her jewelry box. Gives me comfort to know that she knows that we all love her and want the best for her, and that we're thinking about her. And so that's the point. It's not that there's going to be some abracadabra thing that because I did this, she was spared on the operating table. That's not the issue at all. The issue is just as a reflection of my personal love and care for her and her well-being. And it may, you know, if that's as far as it goes, that's as far as it goes. Okay, so anyway.
Well, and it's not magical thinking. It's what we do. We share the magic called life with one another.
Well, and so, love too.
And
life
well,
and
right.
love.
And that's, to me, what drives life is the love. I mean, when Jung said, I think I mentioned early on, you know, when love ends, terror and destruction begin. And
okay,
keep
going. I'm going to need to go away for a minute.
I'm going to read paragraph 574 because I think it qualifies the 570, the tantrum throwing God needing to be salved. Paragraph 574, the character thus revealed fits a personality who can only convince himself that he exists through his relation to an object. Such dependence on the object is absolute when the subject is totally lacking in self-reflection and therefore has no insight into himself. It is as if he existed only by reason of the fact that he has an object which assures him that he is really there. If Yahweh, as we would expect of a sensible human being, were really conscious of himself, he would, in view of the true facts of the case, at least have put an end to the panegyrics of his justice. But he is too unconscious to be moral. Morality presupposes consciousness. By this, I do not mean to say that Yahweh is imperfect or evil, like a Gnostic demiurge. He is everything in its totality. Therefore, among other things, he is total justice, and also its total opposite. At least this is the way he must be conceived if one is to form a unified picture of his character. We must only remember that what we have sketched is no more than an anthropomorphic picture, which is not even particularly easy to visualize. From the way the divine nature expresses itself, we can see that the individual qualities are not adequately related to one another, with the result that they fall apart into mutually contradictory acts. For instance, Yahweh regrets having created human beings, although in his omniscience, he must have known all along what would happen to them. Thoughts, Joel?
Oh my. Somehow the paragraph It's reminding me the book of Job in chapter 42, verse 5, when when Job said, I thought that I knew you.
Mm.
I knew you with my ears, from hearing from you, but now my eyes can see you. And I think that this is this, to me, this symbolizes, for example, the last stage of a personal analysis. And when ego deals with the self, and I have in mind the book that Dr. Edinger wrote, The Encounter of the Self, when he made a psychological reading of the drawings of William Blake, but in a more in a less in a human scale. In the case of a personal analysis, a personal journey, if I think that this paragraph or this encounter between the ego and the self, and in the case of Job and God, when Job, as Jung said, generated the phenomenon or the phenomenon of the God against God. And when Job says, now I knew you with my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is what I like to call soul-led eye, eyes with soul. And I don't like to use this term very much, but sounds like an expansion of the conscience. And I think that we could apply this to our concrete and material living existence, because analysis is for this world, for the cosmos, to ourselves and to the others. And the point is, we should recognize, for example, the difference, but also we learn how we personally deal with the difference, because we are flesh and bone, and the conscience that I have, that I am flesh and bone, is an index of mental health. That is the comment I would like to do.
That's a profound statement that conscience is an index of mental health. You
Yeah.
know, we can therefore put Putin somewhere on that scale, and the rest of
Yeah.
us too. But okay, I want to wrap up fairly quickly here, but I do want to point out a couple of things that I underline, since I do this often and highlight the things that I think are important. One is that Yahweh is too unconscious to be moral. He says this right in the middle of the paragraph. He says, but he is but he is too unconscious to be moral. Morality presupposes consciousness. And as Joel says, conscience also. And then he goes on, by this I do not mean to say that Yahweh is imperfect or evil, like a Gnostic demiurge. He is everything in its totality. Therefore, among other things, he is total justice and also its total opposite. Okay, and this is one of the fundamental issues in Jungian psychology, to recognize that there's always an opposite. There's always duality.
And both of those occur in capital N nature in every moment, which is interesting to me. And the well-being or conscious indicator of health of nature. Nature knows no rage. Nature knows no emotion. It just knows weather.
Right. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to highlight was that the very last sentence of this paragraph, where he says, for instance, Yahweh regrets having created human beings, although in his omniscience, he must have known all along what would happen to them. Okay,
right.
So, to the extent that we're conscious and conscious and with conscience, we all know what's going to happen in the Ukraine-Russian fight in the end. But that doesn't mean that a lot of people aren't going to die first. And so it's God's way of waking us up to the reality of what we are as human beings.
Yeah, there's even a conflict in that last sentence, because up to this point, it's been amoral, not immoral, because of the unconsciousness. But then once that omniscience and he should have known comes in, that's basically making a bridge from the Old Testament to the New Testament, which is in a sense unconscious to conscious. And because for an omniscient, all-knowing, to know what would have happened would imply consciousness and not unconsciousness. And then that's where the morality issue, not the amoral or immoral. I mean, amoral has neither moral or immoral. It's not conscious.
Right.
It doesn't know. But when you get to the moral and immoral, that he should have known would occur. So yeah, very important, I think, amoral versus moral. Amoral being from unconscious, but the all-knowing should have known. Well, that's different than the paragraph started out in the previous paragraph where he's completely unconscious. There's consciousness is being birthed in this paragraph in a way.
Yeah, and I think he does it here in answer to Job, but I want to point out that Dr. Jung had this realization on Mount Elgon, where he saw the rivers of beasts, and he realized that it had taken hundreds of millions of years to develop to that point, and maybe billions of years to develop to that point. And he says, that's, if it's going to take that long to develop, it's a pretty dim consciousness. Right.
Right. Yeah. Not the smartest bulb in the consciousness bulb in the box.
Yeah. So I'm just putting the MailChimp on here so that people from YouTube can find it.
Well, that kind of a dim consciousness that kind of reminds you, now I know my ABCs, won't you come and sing with me? It's preschool consciousness in a way. I mean, it's got a long ways to go if it's going to take that long. And in that is a trickster of, well, the long view is often always better, and except with immediate action when it's required.
Well, what we have to recognize is that we each have a small chip of the divine consciousness in us.
Yeah.
And
that whole myth of it, the little piece of gold getting stuck in each of us as we emerge.
Right. And, we're either on the good side or the bad side. And it's up to us to reflect on which we are, and to understand that there are beings, I'll call the collective unconscious here a being, a living thing, which is constantly changing. And it has its national origins, but also its origins. I mean, if you work for Microsoft or Apple, you have a different perspective on the world. Okay. And so therefore the collective unconscious of Apple employees is quite different from the collective unconscious of Microsoft employees. And yet both may be American, or you might be Chinese for all I know, but you can be a part of many different facets of the collective, is my point.
Right.
And all of us must reflect upon what is it that we in our godlike power want to manifest in the world. Do you want to manifest as a thug, as Putin is? Or are you going to manifest as a hero like Zelensky is, by saying, I don't need transportation, I need ammunition? Right. There's a clear distinction in how the divine power in both of those men is manifesting. And
and I can go from a personal example. 2 years ago, I was absolutely miserable and dissatisfied with the way things had turned out. But instead of bitching about it, which I did a little bit, but halfway through that first sentence, I went, well, it's my job to change it. So what did I do? Turn my life upside down, buy a table, a couple chairs, umbrella, move halfway across the country, and boom. But it's the taking the responsibility for what do I find not just acceptable, but what's going to cause me to thrive. That's healthy. Survival Right. is just baseline. And if you ever dip, you drop below zero. So you need to thrive. And I think part of that is, I don't need transportation. I need ammunition. He's knowing what needs to happen there.
Yeah. Now, Justin Case makes a very valid comment. He said that Soviet Union dissolved much too fast, leaving chaos in its wake. It should have been done more gradually with much thought and patience. And that's nice, but that's not the way of the world. And that's the problem. I mean, when the world economy collapsed in 2008 and took my life savings with it, it left me in chaos for quite a while. This YouTube channel is part of my activity to work my way out of that chaos and to maintain my personal mental health. And so the world doesn't work the Logos way, as Justin would have it. We have to recognize that, life can change in a blink, and you don't know what will happen. I mean, you're driving down the road with your wife next to you, and all of a sudden you lose attention on the road for a few seconds, and the next thing you know, your wife is dead, and you have 3 little children to raise by yourself. That's the kind of blink that we get in life. And so we have to understand that God has given us the power to get through traumas like that. And this is no doubt a huge trauma to the world, not only to Ukrainians, but to everyone in the world, which is why everyone is reacting to it. And we as human beings have to work our way out of it in some way. And, I wanted to say reasonable way, but that's not it. We have to find our footing again in a world of chaos, and keeping in mind that in concert with my earlier comments about the guns of August, if our leaders don't keep their powder dry, we could find ourselves in a global war very quickly here. And so the proof of the pudding about Mr. Biden's leadership is going to be how soberly he takes that challenge. And I believe he's up to it. I have every confidence that he is, but it's not that it's going to be easy, and it's not that it's obvious that you can do X and it'll be over. No. I mean, it's not like, the reaction to all the pundits is, well, is he going to turn off SWIFT or is he not going to turn off SWIFT? Well, that's not going to be a magic wand that solves this problem. Okay, this problem is multifaceted across the world, and all of us have to come to grips with it before we get ourselves engulfed in true chaos that it engulfs the entire world, as it did in World War I and World War II. It can easily happen again. And so let us pray that our leaders have the wisdom to not fall into the inevitability of the guns of August. That's my
and that's a point of coming to grips, the discerning point of the pre-process process. And honestly, I got a big, healthy personal dose of that this week. I got a new 21-foot roof snow rake. I'm going up to the cabin to clean the roof off before we get another 3 feet or whatever. And the drive that had been previously plowed a little bit was maybe 3-4 inches taller, so it didn't look much different. When I drove up 6 weeks ago, I pulled right into the quote unquote drive, and the snow came to the bottom of my car, but there you go, and I stopped. Well, you add 3 or 4 inches, and I learned the hard way, the snow blanket is an insulation, and it's no longer frozen on the bottom because of the cold, it's slush. So when I stopped, my car dropped another 8 inches. All four tires basically stuck.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I'd gone early enough, but I was planning a shotgun trip. Arrive at 2, set up everything, get out by 4 before the sun dips over the bowl. Well, I look up and the sun's dipping over the bowl. I can't get my car out, and I called a colleague up there, and he was busy dealing with a frozen pipe. And then he referred me to a friend that fortunately showed up in 20 minutes with an electric winch on the front of his truck. But he politely let someone pass by, and he got stuck in the culvert on the other side.
Yeah, jeez.
So, here I am, I'm walking, and I kind of day dressed because I still had a coat in the car, but I didn't, and it's sturdy and dropping, but so I'm grabbing the front of the cable and tromping up through, 30 feet in waist deep snow up to the first 24-inch diameter caliper tree, so we can winch pull his truck out to then winch pull my car out. I laugh.
If it ain't one damn thing, it's another. Wow.
Yeah, but it's no blessing in disguise. I had an appointment with my mechanic the next day to deal with a minor oil leak. Well, because my car was planted on the snow, and as he pulled me out, I had to turn the car on and assist with some reverse gear because it just wasn't pulling out. It was so deeply stuck. I found exactly where the oil leak was because there was a little trail. So the beautiful thing is, I told the mechanic, it starts about right here under the hood, but it drips out right here. So just because of the snow and the problem, I diagnosed a whole nother problem. But back to the thing of, you're coming to grips with. Well, I now know that this beautiful snow that makes the dirt and rock road the most smoothest travel of the year when it's packed snow, stay on the road. Because at a certain point, this ice underneath that I previously trusted as a firm datum and foundation is now the trap that I walked into because of the expectation, because the higher snow blankets, insulates, and slushes it. So, I think coming back to the coming to grips with, rather than being compulsive and reactionary, coming to grips with, so that thoughtful, and as Oleg said, we are this irrational, he didn't say irresponsible, irrational crowd, but that focuses when needs be and then goes back. So I think the coming to grips with, there's a very important point that I think Oleg's statement segues into your coming to grips is you can't be on point all the time or you'll exhaust yourself. So the coming to grips with is a way to segue into what to do.
Right.
So,
and I just make one further comment, segue on your comments about the snow, is I have learned extremely painfully that you have to be very careful about when ice is when the snow is melting or there's ice on the road, because any wetness whatsoever makes it so slippery that you can't control yourself. And I've broken my leg and dislocated both shoulders that way over the years. And so please, everybody, winter is coming to an end, but make sure that when the snow is melting, you don't break a limb and end up in the hospital.
Well, completely. And I think I'll add to that lesson there. I kind of set myself up for disaster. The roads all the way there were dry and free and clear of any shine whatsoever, any dullness of black ice. And so there's the road, the paved roads all the way to the last 2 miles were just like clear as in the summer.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to worry about falling 600 feet.
Right.
And I get to no pack on the road and it's smooth, and it's the smoothest I've had all year. So it's getting better and better and better and better until I get to the cabin. I should have realized, park on the street, keep it better, because it's gotten too good. There's going to be a nice counterpoint that balance. It does not make it negative, but to balance this out, there's a point just off the road that is the dance partner of this other smoothness.
Right. And so there's a conversation going on the YouTube chat about energy and sources of energy. And I'll just mention as sort of a final thing that my wife's reaction to the fact that Russia or that Europe may get cut off from 40% of its energy supply. My wife's reaction was, oh, good. That means we're going to get serious about alternative energy.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's straight into the,
really
nice.
That's, you can look at it as, oh, God, the poor Europeans. But on the other hand, you could say, oh, God, thank you that you're going to force the Europeans to focus on alternative energy now. So, Joel, do you have a last comment before we hang up? Because I'm running out of steam here, but
Yes. It just came to my mind. For example, when I go to my analyst, I have a price to pay, and the analyst puts his formation, his graduation and post-graduation in the altar of the analytical relation, and I give my money as a price, and this price is a price beyond the price. And what do I call the price beyond the price? Is the price of the affirmation of my singularity. And so, what so far do I want to go to pay the price of the affirmation of my singularity?
mm-hmm.
The question I leave is, how much do we want to pay for peace? Peace has its price. Peace has its sacrifice. And how much is the price we are willing or wishing to pay to real peace?
Mm-hmm.
That's the
what's
question.
The price to pay for real peace?
That's the question, and we're all paying the price, and honestly, we always have. So people in Europe tend to think that Americans live much cushier, and we can talk about things from a distance and so on. And yet we're all descended from people who may have come from that very region, from Ukraine or Russia or Eastern Europe. We have many Americans that have those origins, and we all have faced this, and we may be facing it again, because, as I said, this can devolve into a global war very quickly. And God knows whose side people will be on in the end. But the problem is that, but my point is that, yes, the Ukrainians, present day Ukrainians, are paying a price now, and that price has been in the potential for many years, because Russia, the Soviet Union sort of grabbed Ukraine back post World War I, and I think many Ukrainians didn't like it then, and they passed that same dislike down through the generations, regardless of whether they speak Russian or not. That's not the point. They may speak Russian, but just because they speak Russian doesn't mean they want Putin to be their Obergruppenführer. And so, they are paying a price now. It's a price that has been in the potential probably for over 100 years, over a century. And we too all pay prices. Everybody pays price for their freedom.
But I was thinking about paying the price for the dissolution, or for the using a Latin term, alchemical term, the solutio of a collective neurosis that results in if I don't go to my analyst or my shrink or my psychologist, and I don't pay the price for my personal analysis, I am also paying a price. But I stay with a conflict unsolved.
Yeah. Yeah, you create a different conflict.
Right, right.
You know, you can either pay the price in Brazilian money, or you can pay the price of, you know, how do you deal with the consequences of not paying? Both are prices.
And so, yeah, you bring up a good point with origins. You know, people of Dutch origin, people of just various, I won't call it all the different countries, but from all the other places in Africa and China and Asia and Europe. But I think that the more cush part of the America experience seems to be that presumption of the knowledge of good and evil, more on that side, whereas you get more of a direct knowing experiential knowledge of good and evil from these kind of situations in that European military term theater, so to speak. And that America in a way has that good and evil. It's a little more mysterious and a little more diluted, I think, because of the giantness of the differentiation of cultures and people and personalities in America. I mean, the culture of America is in a sense no culture. It's composed of all the cultures, except that we do have a specific identity. So I think that there's a dignity and difference, and it's not a weighing of better or worse from the American versus the European versus the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera experience. And that's even just lateral. And I go to South America, you know, and north to Canada. And I think, though, that there is a difference of that, as Joel brought up, that the presumption of the knowledge of good and evil versus a direct knowledge of the good and evil. And I think it's important
of the good and evil. Yeah, I mean, it's a difference between the logos and the eros. The logos is, you know, I can talk about the knowledge of good and evil till I'm blue in the face, but you can also experience it. And that's what's happening to the Ukrainians. The rest of us are just gamming about it in the logos, but they're actually living it.
Yeah, and I think that brings forth the big point of it's important to pay the price to have a direct knowledge of good and evil, so that you're able to discern, and as you said, to, you know, get our minds around this, to, you know, get a grip on this, because to get a grip implies traction and implies effectiveness. For example, me stuck in the slush part, I could run it up to however high I wanted on the tachometer in reverse, and all I would feel is a kick every once in a while as I sank a little deeper.
Yeah.
But you know, you just have absolute not getting the grip, and in fact deflating and diminishing the grip. So it goes back to, I think you're paying the price of spending the time to get a grip on something before, you know, you basically look before you leap.
Yeah. So, Joel, thanks a lot for being here. There will be relief on the
I would like just to say one more line.
Okay.
The world needs America. The civilized world needs America. And the lyrics, I don't know if I'm using the right word, of the national America hymn says, the home of the brave. We need the braves now.
Yeah.
More than ever. More than
the home of the free and the brave. Yeah, surely.
Yes.
No doubt. And
here in this group, in a military rank, I'm just maybe at maximum a couple. What comes after the soldier escape?
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, what comes after soldiers, and that's the important piece too.
Yeah,
To not,
I could talk about this for another 5 hours, but I can't
Yes.
because
Okay.
I have
I
two
don't-
more 2-hour sessions to do today.
Okay,
But
okay.
Joel, on March the 13th is the day. So I guess that's 2 weeks from today that our clocks will be changed. We will spring ahead. That means that it won't be as late for you. And it also won't be as late for you on Monday night. So if you join us on Monday night, instead of having to do it at 10 p.m., you will join us at 9 p.m. your
Okay.
time.
Yeah, Escape.
But-
I wrote few lines about psychological reflection about Pauline. I would like you to send to her if you can.
Okay, please send it through and I'll take a look at it. And so for all those on the YouTube chat, and we have still quite a number of participants either lurking or chatting, thank you for being here today. In the chat, you have both the MailChimp sign up so that you can join our conversation directly, or also is the Confluence the Confluence website so that you can come and join us. I hope that Joel's dreams are convincing him to join us in Helena this summer. It's going to be quite impressive, and I have every reason to believe that Colleen will be with us, and her teaching is truly profound, and I really hope everyone gets a clear understanding from what she will do, which will be to give you a direct experience of these things. And so in the advanced reading group, I think we may finish this Wednesday, if not this Wednesday, next Wednesday, and then we are going to then we're going to address the Neumann series of books on creativity and art, which Jordan has brought to my attention. And so
the place of creation, etc.
Yeah. And just have to keep you on just a moment longer while I ban one more person from the YouTube channel, because I guess they managed to lurk throughout this session, and then at the last minute they try to sneak something in, and I don't allow that anymore. As soon as I see it, I remove it. So
Like the gardener, taking care of the garden.
take your individuation somewhere else.
And my joke when I had a big garden was, weeds are simply plants we don't want to name. So so there is a little prejudice in the garden.
Anyway, Joel, thank you for joining us, and Jordan, thank you as usual.
Yeah,
And peace, everyone. We'll see you